Minister of Labour and Employment briefs Trade Union Congress on federal government efforts to address grievances.
And on Good Morning Nigeria today, we shall discuss President Tinubu's first address to the United Nations at the 78th General Assembly.
President Bola Ahmed Tinubu yesterday addressed the United Nations General Assembly at the 78th meeting of the Assembly holding in New York, United States of America.
That's right, Kirian. And one significant thing about the president outing is that, of course, it was his premier address and also his participation as a Nigerian leader at the UN General Assembly.
Now, the address delivered by President Tinubu covered several issues such as sustainable development, climate change, global cooperation, and the imperativeness of addressing inequalities and global humanitarian crisis.
President Tinubu also made a firm and compelling declaration that the time was now for the United Nations member states to show with their actions that they indeed mean what they say concerning the crackdown on terror financing, economic sabotage, and illicit mineral and arms smuggling in a developing world.
President Tinubu further noted in his address that his aggressive economic development and diplomatic push for new investments has been demonstrably effective in presenting Nigeria as business ready, the ease of doing business. And according to Mr. President, the ease of doing business should not be an encumbrance to large-scale investments in Nigeria.
Now, he equally noted that the global fight against the effects of climate change cannot be based on one-size-fits-all, and that nations must be in a cooperative mood and design and implement their own strategies tailored to their respective socio-economic strengths and weaknesses.
President Tinubu reminded the world that what Africa truly means or represents in the global village. Work with us as true friends and partners. Africa is not a problem to be avoided, nor is it to be pitied. Africa is nothing less than the key to the world's future, President Tinubu re-emphasized.
No question about that, Kirian. Now, the UN General Assembly, that's the 78th Assembly, has as its theme rebuilding trust and reigniting global solidarity, accelerating action on the 2030 agenda and the sustainable development goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all.
President Tinubu is accompanied to the Assembly by 6 governors, 7 ministers, Chief of Staff to the President, the National Security Advisor and Chairman of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, and of course other senior government officials were equally on the entourage. Now, what are the salient issues in President Tinubu's first address to the 78th UN General Assembly? Our panel of discussants will be focusing on these and other issues arising from that address. I am Kirian Umayo. Welcome to Good Morning Nigeria today, and I'm glad to be here again.
And I'm Kingsley Osadolo. I join my colleague Kirian to also welcome you to the program. We are reaching you from our headquarters studios in the nation's capital of Abuja. In the course of the program, we'll take our regular complimentary segments. This will include news, of course, some business news, and newspaper review. Right now, here is our colleague, Dennis Adegunloye, who has the morning news. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Kingsley and Kirian.
That's what you're wearing this morning, Dennis.
Thank you, Kirian. Thank you. Good morning, Nigerians. Here is the morning news. President Bola Tinubu has joined world leaders at the 28th United Nations General Assembly to engage in the annual high-level general debate, where he advocated equal and firm commitment to the African partnerships with the developed world.
To achieve the need popular consensus, this campaign must accord with overall economic efforts. In Nigeria, we shall build political consensus by highlighting remedial actions which also promote economic good.
Every child deserves a chance at a healthy and fulfilling life, and as such, advocacy on awareness and prevention of tuberculosis remains priority in Nigeria. Nigeria's First Lady, Oluremi Tinubu, stated this while speaking on the margins of events organized by Concordia at the ongoing 78th United Nations General Assembly in New York. A statement by her special assistant on media, Busola Kukoyi, indicates that the First Lady spoke at two separate sessions on importance of innovation towards achieving an AIDS-free generation and health standards, as well as investment towards effectively financing the eradication of tuberculosis. To scale down the number in both tuberculosis and AIDS among children, the First Lady says advocacy, especially at the national, state and community levels, would be pursued vigorously, as Nigeria has no reason to record high statistics of prevalence in both areas. Senator Oluremi Tinubu emphasized that with the heightened drive of the President Bola Tinubu administration in the health sector, she will be advocating enhanced actions by the wives of governors from the states of the Federation to take the campaign about awareness and prevention to the grassroots, while rooting for adoption of more innovative approaches, including the deployment of educational apps and digital platforms to disseminate accurate information specific to HIV care and control. The First Lady also highlighted the use of creative and culturally tailored age-appropriate interventions that can promote and amplify safer sexual and reproductive practices. The First Lady also seized the opportunity to highlight the commitment of the Bola Tinubu administration towards restructuring the health system in the country in line with the Renewed Hope agenda through improved financing, provision of modern equipment for diagnosis, capacity building, training of healthcare workers, and transparency in governance as it regards TB response and healthcare delivery as a whole. The United Nations says it welcomes the federal government's position on a coordinated approach to handling humanitarian crises in the country. This was emphasized by a UN delegation led by the Special Advisor to the United Nations Secretary General on Solutions to Internal Displacement, Robert Piper, during a visit to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs and Poverty Alleviation, Dr. Betta Edu, in Abuja.
We need to step away from temporal things to more durable solutions for people who are having humanitarian crisis.
It's a place for us globally where we can learn and where we can also develop our new approaches in support of the government.
And as part of efforts to ensure more processes of bringing succor to the people, Governor Bala Mohammed of Bauchi State has inaugurated a 2 billion naira worth of rural link roads projects. The project is to be supervised by the Rural Access and Agricultural Marketing Project.
I am further delighted to note that the project has selected the 19-kilometer Liman-Katagun-Luda Road to showcase the concept, while other roads are being prepared across the state for various types of intervention.
The Nigerian Midstream and Downstream Petroleum Regulatory Authority has approved the construction of 500 metric tons capacity gas depot in Abuja. The approval was given to Noritech Energy Limited, the first of its kind, and is part of activating the presidential initiative on harnessing gas as the country's transitional fuel.
This will enable not just the supply to improve in Abuja, because generally speaking, Nigeria's gas utilization per capita is far below what you have in even other African countries. Secondly, as you can imagine, this will provide employment opportunities, never mind in revenue.
For the second time in 2 weeks, the Minister of Labour and Employment, Simon Bakalolong, has interfaced with the leadership of the Trade Union Congress, TUC, to brief them on efforts made by the federal government to address their grievances. The minister appealed to the TUC to exercise more patience, explaining that before the president left for the United Nations General Assembly in New York, he was fully briefed and gave further directives on implementation of issues put before him, particularly when he personally met with the Labour leaders. On his part, TUC President Festus Osifo wants more action than promises because workers are getting more impatient due to hardship resulting from the removal of subsidy. Osifo, however, said the TUC is hoping that within the next 2 weeks the presidents would have done everything possible to arrive at a conclusion in which the workers are eager to hear in order to douse the tensions and threats for withdrawal of services by workers. Well, that's the news for now. Good Morning Nigeria continues shortly after this break with Kingsley and Kirian. Good morning.
All right, the program is Good Morning Nigeria on NTA. Now, business. To enhance economic and social protection, development partners are advocating human capital development for the younger generation of Nigerians to take up business in Nigeria. Now, let's get more from our business desk.
Creating opportunities for many Nigerians, these development partners are craving for an active social protection program to address poverty and strengthen the economy.
Social protection is indeed a right. It's not a favor or it's not goodwill on the part of government. It's indeed something citizens are entitled to.
Building capacity of NGOs to be able to also embark on advocacy, and then we also were able to use it to do research in developing policy research paper, and then with which we use it because you need evidence to advocate for policy change.
They are advocating for harmonization of social protection bills by aligning with the National Social Protection Policy.
The SPIN program brought and harmonized the entire gamut of interventions.
Because poor and vulnerable persons in our social register are being targeted, and when you go to the communities to verify and validate the social register, you see some of them right in their communities.
They enjoined economic managers to beam searchlight on national and subnationals to ease economic shocks and complement government efforts in attacking vulnerability, hunger, and poverty. And to the closing figures of Tuesday's tradings on the floor of the exchange. With business news, I'm Kunle Adeyeye.
All right, thank you very much there for the business news package on Good Morning Nigeria. Coming up next for us is Newspaper Review.
All right, and we have Chukwudi Okoli-Obuaja here with us as always for the review of today's national dailies. Chukwudi, you're welcome.
Thank you, Kirian. Good morning. Good morning, Kingsley.
Morning. Good to see you.
Same here.
We have three papers this morning. Let's begin. Vanguard is not pretty regular these days in our review lineup because we really get it before we kick off our review segment. Vanguard newspaper, front page, fairly busy. Above the nameplate says electricity supply crashes 97% to 88 megawatts as grid collapses again. Labour raises alarm over fresh moves to sell unity schools. Nigeria won't allow AU fail to secure continent. That's according to President Tinubu. Gunmen on the rampage in Imo and Enugu kill, burn 8 soldiers and policemen, abduct scores. Presidential poll, that's the kicker. FCT can't be 37th state. Atiku and Obi tells Supreme Court, say 25% in FCT mandatory, ask APEC Court to nullify Tinubu's victory, insists PPC, that's the Presidential Election Petition Court judgment, in their words, perverse and miscarriage of justice. INEC didn't transmit results electronically, and why we are at Supreme Court. That's according to the Labour Party. Tinubu and governors at UNGA in New York. You can see the governors there who are with the president this year's UN General Assembly. And the other photograph below, if the copy you're seeing, because what I'm seeing here is a bit smudged. Protests in Abuja over Mohbad's death. And then also there on the front page, address corruption to build your economy, US tells Nigeria. Why National Assembly won't review social media regulation bill, and that's attributed to Akpabio. And very quickly also from the Leadership newspaper, above the nameplate, 520 Kano children die in diphtheria outbreak. Palliatives, federal government begs for patience at meeting with TUC. NNPC retires management staff in reorganization, and in first UNGA outing, Tinubu seeks real deal for Nigeria and others. Says Africans tired of broken promises and unfair treatment, and worried illegal mining threatens continent security and progress. Solicits support against flow of arms into West Africa. 2024 Hajj, Nigeria retains 95,000 pilgrims allocation. And Falona seeks coroner's inquest into Mohbad's death.
Okay, now it's time for us to look into the Punch newspaper and what the headlines are. And the front page of that paper, the Punch above the name flag. Tinubu's victory. Article will be filed 86 ground appeals at Supreme Court. It's on page 2. Niger crisis will put pressure on Nigerian food market. That's according to World Bank. It's on page 29. That's where you get the details. Dollar shortage. Foreign airlines trapped funds hit $783 million. It's on page 28. Now the lead story, Dangote refinery imports crude as NNPCL swaps oil for loans. Two adders to that. Dangote expects crude from NNPCL November, begins operations October. $3 billion crude for loan deals. Others put pressure on local supply. Well, the photo story is that of the demonstration or protest, as case maybe. Youth protest Mohbad's death, demand justice. It's on pages 4 and 5. Let's for more stories on that. Below that, power-drunk Lagos policemen invade Lekki shop, arrest attendants, plot charges. Get the story on pages 4 and 5 of the Punch newspaper. 2 more doctors nabbed in Plateau over organ harvesting. The story is on page 5. And now UNGA, Tinubu, Biden condemn coups, insist on democracy. You get all the gist on page 39 of the Punch newspaper. Chukwudi.
Thank you.
It's time to bring you in.
Thank you, Kirian. We don't parade stubbornness in the newsroom. But what makes a journalist, if he's still a journalist, is he's trailing a story that is in the interest of the public. So I like what I see here. 2 things really. Youth protest the death of Mohbad. Nobody has accused anybody of killing anybody yet. But if there are very suspicious circumstances surrounding an incident, we have a job, not just to be fair to the dead, but to help society keep growing, to investigate such a thing. So, civil insistence on proper procedure in terms of determining how this promising young man suddenly, was plucked off of the earth by death. It is very important that we pursue that path. I really support the youths insisting on fine procedure, and one that, if eventually anyone is proved to have been culpable, one that would deter in future anyone trying anything against their fellow man, and that resulting in a homicide or whatever one could call it. Now, the other story I'm interested in is that 2 more people have been arrested concerning the harvesting of organs in Plateau State. You know, we have been banning the name Kekere and all that. 2 more people have been arrested, you know, and they are being investigated. There was a pathetic one yesterday. A young boy whom even the Lagos State governor went to the hospital to see died eventually. They said his small intestine was removed, was harvested. That's what they said. Please, since I wasn't part of the team that investigated it, let's not be too, you know, insistent on it. But the point I'm making is we are beginning to hear these stories about organ harvesting in such a horrifying manner that you now want to make sure anytime your relative goes for an operation, they have to check whether all the sets and subsets in their anatomy, you know, are still intact. How did we get to this dangerous pass in life? That is what irks you. Now, Dangote Refinery imports crude as NNPCL swaps oil for loans. What I understand from the story is that the NNPC would not be in a position to supply fuel to Dangote Refinery till about November. Naturally, you would expect that they are into other contracts that, you know, gives their crude to other entities and all that. So there's likely to be a gap, you know, depending on the tenure of those agreements and all that. So I don't think it's anything that should make anyone begin to talk tongue-in-cheek about the delay. Remember, we were supposed to see refined petroleum from, was it June or August? I can't remember the exact date that was given. But the Englishman says it's never late to mend, better late than never. So hopefully, but whenever the petrol comes from, not just petrol, I think allied products are going to be there as well. Whenever they start giving us fuel, one thing that keeps on bothering me is what kind of price regime are we going to see? If landing costs are not going to be part of what they have to bargain with, because they'll be pulling crude from us directly, is it going to help us have prices that are more manageable? Or are we going to say, oh, there was massive import of infrastructure to set up? Well, you can't offset massive import of infrastructure to set up the refinery in one fell swoop. It has to be over a period of time. Yeah. So that should not be an excuse. I'm not saying they made that excuse. I'm just trying to preempt whatever might work against our having manageable prices.
Yes, I don't really understand the deal that you just explained. Maybe in future I will. I mean,
well,
that's
NNPC
understand.
has an allegiance, or rather a commitment, to some entities, you know, over supply of crude in the meantime, and they are saying that whatever happens from November, they should be able to now let them.
We say that Dangote Refinery imports crude.
Yes.
So which means he's importing crude from elsewhere.
Yes.
And is that not going to affect the price of the finished product when he refines?
For now, the argument from November, NNPCL would take over.
Yeah, exactly. The argument will be, from an ordinary Nigerian who is just watching, observing, will be that the Dangote Refinery didn't start today. I mean, it's been there. I mean, the planning, in fact, the construction, everything, has been there for years now. And it came to fruition sometime last year or early this year, you know, shortly before the last administration, you know, left power. You know, it was commissioned and all of that, so which means it was nearing completion, and now we are seeing the light of it. So what I'm saying, in effect, is that somehow, I wouldn't know the reason why there should be any gap in the first place, because the plan, excuse me, I am just saying, see, I'm talking from the angle of an ordinary Nigerian, saying, while all this while Dangote has been there, the business has been struck, why is it not difficult for NNPC to supply crude to them? Why is it not going to start importing first before the supply will come? Then what were they doing within this period that Dangote refinery was being, gradually, put in place.
You mentioned the view of the ordinary Nigerian,
yes.
the mindset,
yes.
the likely mindset.
Why is that delay? Why should
but that's why the ordinary Nigerian has the likes of you, to explain certain things.
Why should Dangote import crude that we have?
Wait a minute.
I mean,
no, I don't think. Let's not be hard on the situation. Okay. For instance,
yes.
we were expecting the petroleum products to start rolling out, sometime 2 months ago or thereabouts.
Okay.
Now, since that has not happened, if NNPC had rearranged its contractual agreements to tally with that,
why did they do that?
Wouldn't that have been?
But why didn't they do that? Well, the time is left to do that. See, we are looking at this from the point of view of reality of life. We're talking about implementation of a process. So it has been determined. There's no other blueprint on the deal. The deal has been established, well known for by the two parties. So what I'm saying is this: the gap shouldn't have been there. There should have been no reason for him to import crude from anywhere, because we are the sixth in the world. See, listen, there are things you tell Nigerians, they will begin to say, what is going on? How could Dangote of all people begin to import crude that we have?
We are talking
in
about
the backyard.
We are talking
the
about a period of just 1.5 months or 2 months.
See,
please, let's be careful with this. Please, it's very important.
That is what we are saying. See, this things we are saying is good. It's governmental, perhaps processes, whatever it is, bureaucracy and what have you. Yes, but it's not going well for national development. Not just
we've been living cap in hand.
Not just
you can't plan in a situation where you practically live cap in hand.
We have,
you're talking about things that happen.
Put your cap.
I'm not going to do that. We get crazy sometimes.
Have national development plan. We have national development plan.
No, but I think I think that the point Kirian is making is germane. Look, you have your business plan, you have your operational plan. So at what time did that get out of joint? And NNPC itself, NNPCL as it's now called, has asked its top management staff with less than 15 months to retire, to go, effective yesterday. So they're having reorganization. But NNPCL is a shareholder in the Dangote refinery. And Dangote refinery would have sketched out its crude supplies for the operation of that refinery. So when did all of this get out of joint? Now, when NNPC got into the credit facility that he gave, and so on and so forth, was also conscious of his obligation to Dangote. And how does the daily production output affect the quantum of crude readily available? Some of these stories, when you hear them, you get worried, because they can only emerge, in circumstances where, as is often said, you import what you have and you export what you don't have. That's the bottom line. On the one hand, we brag about the largest refinery, was it in Africa or I don't know where else in the world. Yeah, that's size. Well, get it working.
Yes.
Get it working.
Yes.
And then get it working efficiently, so that, again, if you are an advocate of the shareholder profit maximization norm, you say, okay, for the benefit of shareholders, for products to come around, and so on and so forth. But the critical element, if you import crude, the crude that all these fire and other illegal bunkers are having access to and using to despoil the environment in the Niger Delta and other oil-producing places in the country.
Cannot have.
Stolen crude and so on and so forth. I don't know.
And you cannot have it.
You see, you finally got there.
Yes.
You have been talking into an ideal situation.
Exactly.
That's what you have been doing.
That's what we're looking for.
Is the situation in this country ideal?
See, when we always have reasons for failure. We always have reasons for failure. Very constructive reasons for failure. Cogently packaged reasons for failure. But the idea is this: the bottom line is, if you are not able to achieve an objective, you have failed. If you package all the reasons in this world are constructive with all the elements, articulacy, whatever you have, fine. But you did not deliver.
You have sweet adjectives for describing calamity.
Gentlemen, let's caution ourselves. Maybe the details are not out there in the public domain. But let us also equally remind ourselves that in the industrial sector, one of their perennial complaints is that they need forex to import raw materials. Forex to import raw materials. Those raw materials are available here. And you see the pressure it places on our forex. So where will Dangote get the forex from to import crude? At what? At what price?
Well, that's a priority item.
What is the exchange rate? What is the exchange rate
at the moment?
Let's not pry into that.
No, you will run it.
Our time is up.
Yes.
Otherwise, I'm going to tell you that a nation can really take actions that do not quite go with the current policy if it is in the national interest. Laws are made for man is not made for laws. So let's not be rigid about it, gentlemen. That's what I think.
Well, we always have these policies, somersaults, clashes, interests, people bringing in their interest in public affairs and all of that, and making us not to deliver.
The bane of Africa.
No, I mean that's the bane of Africa, and that is not good for us. We need to change, and that's what it's all about. So Chukwudi, thank you for making today's conversation, or what?
I hope I didn't hit up the politics. Nigerians love their phrases.
No, it's okay.
We heated up the downstream sector.
Downstream sector. Thank you, Chukwudi.
Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you so much.
Yes. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria. I hope the review went down well with you. We'll do that again tomorrow. Thank you for staying with us. This is Good Morning Nigeria. We'll take a short break now.
You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. Now, as a prompt for our conversation, which is a review of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's address at the ongoing 78th UN General Assembly, let's listen into this background put together by our correspondent, Joseph Otsen.
Other nations and their private sector actors must see Africa as a development priority, not just for Africa, but in the interest of us all as well. Direct investment in critical industries, opening airports to a wider range and larger quantity of African exports, and meaningful debt relief are important aspects of the cooperation we seek.
Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu addressing the 78th meeting of United Nations General Assembly in New York, United States of America. This is the first time he will be performing these tasks at the United Nations General Assembly, UNGA. With the 78th UNGA having the theme, Rebuilding Trust and Reigniting Global Solidarity, Accelerating Action on the 2030 Agenda and its sustainable development goals towards peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all, the President presents the stand of Nigeria, but first speaks to ongoing reforms to establish a solid foundation for growth and investment towards building sustainable economic development in the country. To President Bola Tinubu, the question now is not whether Nigeria is open for business. The question is, how much of the world is truly open to doing business with Nigeria and Africa in an equal, mutually beneficiary manner?
We seek enhanced international cooperation with African nations to achieve the 2030 Agenda and Sustainable Development Goals.
The Nigerian leader blamed Africa's setback to broken promises and foreign exploitation of its resources, but made it clear to the international community that Africa do not want to be pitied, but seen as an equal partner with a key to world progression. He pointed out 5 thematic areas to be addressed to unlock the global wealth. They are building strong investments, affirming democratic governance, combating violent extremism, securing the continent's mineral-rich areas from pilfering and conflict, and fighting climate change on African terms.
Projects such as Green Wall to stop desert encroachment, halting the destruction of our forests by mass production and distribution of gas burning stoves, and providing employment in local water management and irrigation projects are examples of efforts that equally advance both economic and climate change objectives.
President Bola Tinubu told member states to reply to these calls by working with African leaders to deter their firms and nationals from the 21st century pillage of the continent's riches. In his words, the pillage of one nation's resources by the overreach of firms and people of stronger nations must now end. On Good Morning Nigeria, guests will analyze the take-home of President Bola Tinubu's address at the 78th UNGA.
All right, thank you, Joseph, for that report. And to discuss President Tinubu's first address to the United Nations General Assembly, let's first of all welcome Ambassador Dr. Martin Ohomobi, former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, former Under Secretary General of the United Nations, and former President of the United Nations Human Rights Council. So we're glad to have you this morning.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Kieran.
All right, and with us also here in the studio is Professor Abuja Adeniyi, Professor of Communication and Deputy Dean, School of Postgraduate Studies, Biz University. You're welcome to the show.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right. Also part of this conversation, joining us via Zoom from Lagos is Dr. Humphrey Ojako. Dr. Humphrey Ojako is Nigeria's former permanent representative to the United Nations offices and other international organizations in Geneva. Of course, he had also been in Switzerland and the Principality of Liechtenstein. Ambassador Ojako, we're glad to have you on the program this morning.
Good morning. I can't, the audition is not good at this end, so I can't hear you clearly, but I'm with you. Thank you.
Well, I couldn't hear you clearly, but whatever it is, we're glad that you are part of our conversation this morning. Ambassador Umoibi, who is here, of course, has indicated that you took over from him in Geneva when, of course, he got some other posting. But let's begin to this conversation with Ambassador Umoibi right here with us in the studios. President Bola Ahmed Tinubu made his maiden outing yesterday at the UN General Assembly. What are your thoughts?
Well, thank you very much, Kingsley. It's a pleasure to be here. And on such an occasion, just a few hours after our president made his first statement at the UN General Assembly. Of course, going into history, I apologize, I'm a historian, so I like history a lot. If you have no sense of your history, then you have no identity. The United Nations, of course, came into existence in 1945, following the signing of the San Francisco Charter. That charter gave birth to the United Nations. And what is most striking to me and relevant here is that maybe just one country in Africa was in San Francisco. There were 51 nations that were there when that charter was born. But in good faith, today, of course, the United Nations is 193 or 194 member states that make up the organization. And 55 African countries are now there. They were not there. But this is something that Africa went into in good faith, believing that their interests will be better served in a global forum such as the United Nations. Because the United Nations was created, as stated in the preambular paragraph, charter of the organization, to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in her lifetime had caused untold sorrow to mankind. So this was supposed to be a global forum for the collaboration and unification of actions of nations. So, signing the charter, Nigeria signed as the 99th member on October 7th, 1960. Tafawa Balewa did that for us. And constantly from that period, Nigeria has attended this event every year at the level of the president. So Mr. President was quite right to have personally attended that meeting, consistent with the tradition and the customs of our great country, Nigeria. And it's a forum that brings all the member states, virtually all the member states, 194 nations, 93 nations together. So there's no better forum to reach the world than the General Assembly. So it was critically, diplomatically important for our president to be one of the presidents that was there. And what is most striking to me, as one who has served in that forum before, was that that was the very first day. This is a privilege and a position for Nigeria. That was the first day of the General Assembly, of this 78th session of the General Assembly. On previous occasions, it has not always been consistent. And that shows that the interest of the world is actually focused on those who will speak on that very first day of the resumption of the General Assembly session. So it was significant that our president was one of the first presidents on the first day of the 78th session of the General Assembly. And we'll talk more about the details of what he said. But I just say that it is globally important, it is significant, and it is diplomatically pertinent and relevant for Nigeria to have been there and represented by the president himself. Thank you.
Yes, one last point you made that, as struck me was actually the fact that he was scheduled to speak on the first day. Because, usually that this arrangement of who speaks, the arrangement of speakers and leaders of nations. Right. And it's indeed nice also that you gave us the historical backdrop, of UN as an organization. And now let's bring in yet another former ambassador, Ojak or Dr. Ojak or Humphrey. Now, let's bring you in here. Our president appeared at the world stage, in fact, the highest level of a diplomatic gathering globally. What is your assessment of his outing yesterday? All right, we seem to be having issues along the line of communication with our guest, Ojak. Well, we'll try that again as our engineers are doing something to get him reconnected. Now, let's return to our studio here in Abuja for now and engage Professor Abiodun Adeni. Well, let's get your own thought, of what he was able to do yesterday. Actually, you're a communicator. Did he communicate? Because it's one thing is to read a script, another thing is to deliver the script properly and, of course, communicate.
Okay, first, sometimes we see the UN General Assembly and presidents talking on that platform as something that is merely routinious. Those days, it could be dramatic, when we have a president coming and speaking for hours on end, we remember the historic speech of Fidel Castro, who spoke for about 4 hours. But of course, the world has transited. The world that moved into a different stage, where we have presidents taking advantage of the short time they are given to highlight some of the key things bothering their nation. And our president was not missing, as the case could be yesterday. But instructively, I thought the president to some extent exceeded some expectations. One, if you look at the aesthetics of his delivery, when you're talking about communication, if you look at the aesthetics of his delivery, he exceeded the expectation because his points were clearly made. It was quite gestural. He deployed body language to drum home his message, irrespective of the literary meaning embedded in his delivery. Oftentimes, we had fears in the past that when it gets to this kind of stage, that we had hoped that there won't be some kind of disappointment. And of course, we were the ones that were practically somewhat disappointed yesterday because he upped the ante, he did well, and of course, we saw him being alive, to the point he was making, beyond the literary meaning, beyond the words that he was expressing. The messages were sent to him with the power of body language. We can also be very, very effective when we're talking about communication being effective, really. And moving from then on, of course, he gave expectedly a helicopter view of everything that we were anticipating. What more could he have done other than highlighting some of the challenges bedeviling on as a nation, economic challenges, political challenges, where he harped on the importance of democracy, the way he's been doing since he came into power as chairman of ECOWAS, as the president of an influential country on the African continent. Of course, he drew attention to that. Then, of course, he was concerned about economic pillaging, where we have arms coming into Africa on account of foreign powers being interested in our mineral resources. Then climate change featured expectedly as well. He didn't mince word on that. Then, of course, what about the philosophy of international relation, where we have at the level of pride, prestige, and ego or brand, where there's a certain regard for us as Africans, as people who are generally obliged, to other nations, particularly Western nations of the Western hue. He said, well, it was important that he said, we are there for investment, but you need us as much as we need you, which is why partnership is much more important rather than a master-servant relationship. Yes, he may not have used those words, but they were implied overall. So I think he was quite rounded, he was quite exhaustive within the limited time available. He exceeded expectation. But of course, there are some other things that we expect that beyond relying on partnership, relying on foreign direct investment, which he helped on, beyond talking about foreign countries, stronger nations, helping us to unlock our potentials, it's also the need for us to look inwards. We do not expect that to feature yesterday, but there's a subtext, in all of it, that rather than outright dependence, we also need to be much more inward-looking to strengthen our macroeconomic conditions, so that foreign investment can naturally come without necessarily lifting of fingers.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Abiodun Adeneye. Let's bring in again Ambassador Umoibi. Let's tap from your many years in diplomatic service. Usually for a presidential statement on behalf of a nation at the United Nations, what are the considerations? It's a global forum and a global platform where you would expect that global issues will ordinarily predominate. But we also heard the President yesterday, yes, while talking about global affairs, narrow them down to sub-regional and ultimately national considerations. From your experience, what are the guideposts in preparing such a statement?
Thank you very much. In preparing such address, you have to take into consideration several areas of interest to you. National interest is key to foreign policy. People are not going to the UN to just really out of love. It's not a romance. It's not a game. It's a game in the sense that your own interest, national interest, is projected, promoted, defended, and escalated to a point that it can be of benefit to your country. So the national interest is key to any diplomatic engagement. For Nigeria, our interest is a bit more complex than that, because as the most populous black nation on earth and the #1 economy now of Africa, there is a Nigerian DNA that is uncompromising about speaking for the black race and for Nigeria and for Africa. That has been characteristic of our projections of foreign policy conduct since 1960. 7 days after our attainment of independence, we signed the charter and we led the first UN peacekeeping force in sub-Saharan Africa in the DRC. So that resonated in the statement yesterday when Mr. President talked about that Africa is not a burden, that Africa is not a problem to the world, but Africa wants justice and fairness so that we can benefit from collaborating with the rest of the world to realize our potentials as a continent. And you do know, of course, that Africa is one of the poorest regions on earth. But in terms of natural resources and endowment, Africa is #1 And the irony is that we're very close. Geographically, 5 kilometers gets you to Europe, but Europe is one of the most prosperous nations. Why is it that only 5 kilometers away and next door to them is the most impoverished part of the world? Why? So that passion in Nigeria has always been there and is consistent, and it reverberated yesterday in Mr. President's statements when he talked about defending that Africa is not a challenge, not a poverty burden, but Africa wants genuine cooperation. Another aspect of his speech, which I think resonated very rightly in these Pan-Africanist tendencies of the Nigerian DNA, is when he talked about governance. Why is it that we're suddenly having a crisis in governance? What roles are the various actors, even members of the United Nations, playing? Because one of the challenges we are facing today, he didn't say that in his statement, but I could read that coming out, being myself an active global player, that there's something that when he talked about the breakout of coups on the continent, yes, bad governance. But who is benefiting from bad governance? What is the ulterior? Are these coups not proxy coups generated by vested interests that are not necessarily indigenous to the African continent? So that came to my mind, listening to him also speak, even though it was not expressed so openly in that statement. But he also talked about the need for us to deal with enduring democracy. We have to have democracy that endures, the democracy that will really bring about good governance, not democracy for its own, just for the sake of it, but genuine democracy and bad leadership to be wiped out. That's a challenge for the whole of Africa. But I dare say that we have to take responsibility because it is our continent. But we must also, those who deal with us, who collaborate with us to keep this system where it is, must also have a different attitude and posture towards those relations. So I would give kudos to Mr. President for very articulate, and my brother, the professor of mass communication, talked about even the way he spoke. He spoke with conviction and with a great deal of personal involvement in what he was saying. He wasn't just reading a script. And that is really very important.
Yes, that's a deliberate delivery, if I may use that. Well, let's return to Professor Adeni one more time. There is something that Ambassador said, before he rounded off, to say who is benefiting from bad governance on the African continent. Another question could be, who is facilitating bad governance inside Africa and all of that? Yeah. Now, you also mentioned something in your first outing to say, looking inwards to strengthen our macroeconomic environment.
Yeah.
Before you even begin to attract investment in a place where people will come and spend their huge sums of money. That's another aspect. Again, let me ask you this. Now, it appears that the international development environment is exerting a lot of influence on the way and manner our national policies are structured and what have you. And if you now link this, with the president's presentation yesterday, you find out that there is this level of perhaps reliance, on the international community, especially in terms of investment. Ambassador also highlighted one or 2 points about it. Now, why should that be? Because in the policy analysis, you are drawing inference, from another system, into yours, and at the end of the day, you find yourself relying, even totally, on on foreigners to assist you. That's what's happening in the Francophone countries.
Yeah. Well, I think if you look at the historical context of global evolution, whether politics or economics, it's not really been equal, and for different reasons, and Africa has been at the receiving end of this inequality, largely, and of course, thinkers have situated this in different guises. That's why we had questions around the development of underdevelopment, center, periphery conception of it. But again, we cannot continue to wallow in the past, because around us we have seen nations who have also suffered inequality, some kind of injustices like ourselves, who have risen through these difficulties to express themselves, to announce their arrival on the global stage. You know, oftentimes we talk about Singapore, which is right, Malaysia, which is right, India to some very large extent, which is right, China as well. And even in the African subcontinent, we have countries that we can easily refer to, you know, as being exemplar. Botswana comes to mind, Rwanda comes to mind, even though there are questions around their democratic credentials. But we are seeing development, we are seeing stability. So there are reasons to say yes, we can depend on foreign powers, the rich ones, for aids and grants, but it's often better if we look inwards more, you know, because I think Ambassador alluded to it, and it's something that is common in international studies, that, you know, your international politics will be determined by your local politics. Your international flavor, outlook is a function of your domestic policy, which is why domestic policy is also very important for us to strengthen. If we do not strengthen it, we can hardly be regarded. And of course, nations cannot necessarily come to power you up where you're probably not ready to power yourself. The very recent example that we can see in history are countries in the Middle East, United Arab Emirates, etc. You could see how they express themselves at the level of development, and you could see eventually how they attracted foreign investment, you know, human resources, infrastructure, whether soft or hard. But are we at that stage yet? How ready are we to move into that stage? And that's why we also talk about leadership now and again. You know, leadership is very key. You know, what signs are you showing? You know, what symbols are you exhibiting, you know, to demonstrate seriousness, you know, towards growth and development? And how are your policies, to what extent are your policies people-centric? How are you involving and integrating people? The president rightly alluded to the question of democracy being sustainable by discouraging coup, but it's at the same time, he also started, I noticed that he has also started mentioning what critics or people who are inviting coups are saying, that if you don't want coup, then you have to provide good governance. He mentioned it yesterday that yes, good governance will also come if we do not want coup. But beyond mentioning it, it's also an epitome of the kind of thing we've been talking about. Yes, our leaders say the right things most of the time. There's no doubt, even before Tinubu, most leaders often said the right things, but the brain is often implementation, execution. And execution, that's why it shouldn't just be about mouthing things or pronouncing things, but we have to see fruition, you know, of your promises, so that the people can have this rightful belief that you've actually come to serve, as the case could be.
Thank you very much. We've had on our screen a close-up shot of the president delivering his address at the UNGA. Well, that's a fairly longer shot. There was a close-up shot. I wanted to just remark on the president's wardrobe. I thought that the president's wardrobe was soft, sober, businesslike, and suitable for the occasion. Ambassador. His wardrobe. That is his dress.
His costume.
His dress. I just thought it was soft, sober, businesslike, and suitable for the occasion, and representing our cultural disposition.
Yes, well, the Nigerian DNA is clear for you to see. When you go on the streets in Trafalgar Square or in the United Nations, and you see two black people, or three of them talking, no one will tell you where they are coming from. It's because of the Nigerian DNA. So, Mr. President does reflect the true Nigerian DNA on the global platform. And that's very significant as well.
Well, the most substantive issue I want to get into, because I've been saying that, you know, and I just thought I should make the comment and then I'll sit. I know that the communicator is also interested in commenting on that, but much more seriously, and the costume is also a serious matter, by the way, but much more seriously, one of the key points that the president touched on, and Ambassador Omoibe, you already started elaborating on that, I want us to dwell on it further. The president said Africa should not be considered a problem to be avoided or a continent to be pitied. And then he invited the global community, more particularly the key influencers around the world, to work with Africa. Now, let's decompose that statement and see what challenge it represents to, one, our development partners. 2, instigators of this instability on the continent of Africa. 3, those who are providing succor and sustenance for the destroyers of the continent, and more particularly, what it means for the African intelligentsia to take off from this line and say, look, how do we now convert ourselves from an object of pity and avoidance to an object of, to a substance of acceptance and cooperation? Ambassador.
That really, Kingsley, thank you very much. That really struck me yesterday. And I would give a lot of applause to the President for that point. Africa is not a continent to be pitied. That's part of the circulation of the pathological narrative, which our friends from elsewhere like to parade about Africa. Did Africa begin in the 16th century with slave trade? Is that when Africa was born? How did the slave trade come about? After the slave trade, what happened? What replaced slave trade in terms of our global relations? Colonial conquests and occupation of African space for exploitation, control, domination, subjugation, and pulverization of people, because industrial revolution has taken place and people had got Maxim gone. Then the Second World War let loose on the world. 53 million lives were lost as a result of the Second World War. Who were those who cooperated with the rest of the world to fight that war? Africans did. Then the UN was born. Africans were not represented. Today, is Africa a part of the United Nations Security Council, a permanent member? No, there's no African face on permanent membership of the UN Security Council. Why? Which country in post-Second World War has projected power 1,000 kilometers from each shore to stabilize 2 entities without borrowing a farthing from others? Nigeria did. Which country is known globally as a global peacekeeper? Nigeria is. Nigeria has never gone to war against any country. Not that we are never been provoked, but we are peace-loving people. Why is Nigeria not a member of this permanent member of the Security Council? I'm sorry, I think I have deviated, but I just wanted to say the point that Africa, he struck a very powerful message yesterday, that Africa does not deserve pity. Africa deserves genuine partnership and collaboration, not mouth, not semantics, genuine partnership. As I said, it's paradoxical for me that a continent as naturally endowed and resourced as Africa stands 5 kilometers away from another continent that is the richest in the world and which we have had relations with for more than 600 years. And people are fretting and panicking about China. And I once asked a friend of mine from the other side, I said, hey, China is 24 hours from Nigeria by air. We don't speak Chinese in Nigeria. Why are you worried about China? What have we been doing that is wrong? Let's genuinely cooperate. So I think it resonated with me yesterday that it is not about pity, it's not about pathological narrative. It's about genuine partnership, which is inscribed in the UN Charter, which is what the purpose is. It's not just a celebration. Jamboree, we pay huge money to pay for hotel rooms every year in New York. But what do we take out of there? That is what is important. And so I think that statement really deserves all the historical analysis and reckoning as it deserves. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, that's one aspect of this I like us to talk about. As a matter of fact, that aspect, yesterday was quite touchy, because he hit the nail on the head about Africa. But so many people are concerned about our own attitude towards governance, our own attitude towards the partnership that we are talking about. In Africa, is a place where even the committee or whatever committee set up to engage in partnership arrangements with even the West will come back here and fail to implement their own aspect of the engagement. That is the issue that we have on the African continent. You, Prof, you talked about having a helicopter view of what the problems are. I don't even see anything much difference, from what was delivered yesterday and what former president of Nigeria did. But it's always that helicopter view you're talking about that we all know, that are encapsulated in all our issues that we know globally, So now, he mentioned the issue of good governance, which is very germane, considering the fact that bad governance is the bane of Africa. Still today it's happening there. Right. The attitude of politicians is also that. That's why when you engage the West, they begin to look at your attitude to governance. They begin to look at your demeanor in terms of governance, in terms of bureaucracy and all of that. So if you're looking for an equal partnership, you also bring up equal behavior in terms of, relating well with what has been able for us to do. So now, he is asking for equal partnership. Prof, has that not been equal partnership in terms of negotiations, businesses, multinationals who are in Nigeria operating for the past 50 years and what have you, and other African countries? And is it not because of bad governance that the coup plotters have taken over almost the francophone, part of Africa and so on? So, I mean, in all of this mix, what do you make of our UN contribution yesterday? Yes, I mean, after all that, we'll come back, as he said. What do we do after that? How do we follow up?
Yeah, but I think if you look at it more critically, a partnership is okay. It was good that he called for it. But what I imagined he was thinking, it's for the stronger powers to enable Africans to up the ante, in whatever we do at this level, at these collaborative levels. Because partnership critically can hardly be equal. There's often a stronger and a weaker power. And that's why the law, regulations come in to ensure fairness, fairness. But the fairness, some level of equality is what the president was probably referring to, because some of these countries that probably need support from are far stronger than we are economically, politically, militarily, practically in all sectors of life. But it's not to say that we should be disrespected. It's not to say that we should be disregarded. It's not to encourage, overt cheating, or unbridled, circumvention of processes on account of their power or prowess. That's what I imagine that the president was talking about. But again, what about the question of this, the need for us to look inward? And looking inward is very, very important because you alluded to it severally in your question. And it kept, stimulating thoughts in me. One is some of the big elephants that we have in our room, the absence of transparency, the absence of accountability, open luxuriation for a nation that is very, very poor, And of course, where do we exhibit these things? We exhibit these things in these nations from whom we are seeking help. And they are looking at us probably thinking that we're not too serious, because we see how resources are easily filtered away, hidden in these countries, and we now want to go back to them to ask for support. It's a delicate contradiction that has to be resolved, and that's why we're talking about leaders having the political will, not just to nip this in the bud, but of course to prosecute and probably sanction cases of infraction so that it can be a deterrence for others. If we do not begin to see these things, I doubt if capital will really flow into our climb. The evidence is all over the place, and we have also seen how some other countries before us did it, and how they encouraged naturally foreign investment, foreign flow of capital, how multinational companies, transnational firms started outsourcing resources, outsourcing responsibilities to them on account of the stability of their microeconomic environment. But are we deliberate about these things beyond speech making, beyond elegant display at showpiece events? How deliberate are we?
Okay.
These are the questions that we'll probably also need to be
Prof,
concerned
thank you very much. Again, we'll see the organic linkage in the President's address to the UN General Assembly. Because the more you explain what the conditions precedent should be for investments to come in, for there to be genuine partnership, the more somebody would say, okay, there's still some message out there to the international community. Happily, we'll have enough time to drill into that. I want to draw this example, but then provide a linkage. The disaster that Germany and Japan suffered as a result of the Second World War isn't as much as what the whole of the African continent has been suffering and is still suffering. And there is no Marshall Plan for Africa. That's one point. Why would it be difficult to have a Marshall Plan for Africa? You talked about outsourcing. Part of the instigation for the development of the Chinese economy was the result of outsourcing. And after the Americans were defeated in Saigon in 1975, they have, in recent times, gone back again to investing in Vietnam. And we see the president of the U.S., Biden, was in Vietnam. So, what changed in Vietnam, and what can we do in Africa, and what can they also do in terms of bringing these things in? Marshall Plan, I mean, we're not dropping these bombs on ourselves. And that is the linkage I would like also to talk about, because the president said there is need for action on terror financing and illicit weapons flowing into Africa. Because the instability that we talk about arises from these weapons. How many arms manufacturers are here on the African continent? Where are these weapons being made? And why is that not an issue that should concern all and sundry? We keep hearing about customs. I mean, Kyria, you and I have said virtually every day, hearing about Nigerian customs apprehending contraband of ammunition being imported into the country. And the producer nations, the producer entities are not being asked, why are you doing this? We have seen what has happened with trying to wipe out entire vegetations where coca leaves are being produced so that cocaine doesn't get exported to the advanced world. So that's the linkage I was talking about. You say provide an objective condition, but in the meantime, you let's be honest with ourselves. The global north, is busy providing the conditions that do not enable Africa to be stable, and then the pity and avoidance continue. Ambassador.
Kyrian, I was privileged to be the first African to be elected president of the United Nations Human Rights Council. This is almost becoming like a human rights conversation. But no one is trying to exonerate anybody to say that Africa must not take responsibility. The responsibility is ours. Americans built America. Britain built Britain. Britons built Britain. We should not expect Africa to be built by non-Africans. Africans must build Africa. Nigerians must build Nigeria. But that is not to say that in understanding the complexity and complicatedness of our situation, we must not go into the root causes and how this is escalated and perpetrated. That's why we go some of this, because most of us don't often look at this because of those who tell our stories. Africans don't tell their stories. They wait for others to tell their stories. And then they blame history for their problems. We must take responsibility. And leadership is key in that regard. But the leadership process in Africa, is it the best? Is it not flawed? Usually. Such that produces the best? Do we always put our best foot forward in the continent? Why is that the case? Murtala Muhammad of blessed memory made a historic statement which tells the destiny of Angola. That Africa had come of age. Let Africans decide, MPLA or who. 34 days after he made that statement, he was killed in Lagos. How? Don't ask me. So, to be naive, not know that this is a challenge that you must take note of, and that you are not unaware of what goes on in international politics, is part of our problem. because we tend to be usually very straightforward. There are two faces everywhere in diplomacy, I dare say. And we need to know that in Africa. The Nigerian in particular, I think, we're good people.
Too good.
Nigerians are wonderful people. To be honest, I'm passionate about this and have goose flesh in my body saying this because I know it to be a fact. I'm not speaking sentiment. And so because of that, we give good to others. And naturally, that's what comes out. That's why 62 years, I want to know one or two other countries in the world that have such complexity and complicated as Nigeria that is still in one piece, fabricated by an alien power for their own interests. Nigeria sets a record. So I would like to make the case that Africans must know that they are not to be pitied. And that's why that statement resonates in me. We must solve our own problems. And our problems is, how are they? Leadership, I said, okay, who are the political elite class? We, our traditional rulers, are different in a way they handle matters. Do you go to the Oni of Ife to tell him how to govern Ife? Do you go to the Sultan of Sokoto to tell him how to govern Sokoto? Do you go to Oba of Benin and give him a lecture? Did you go to university to learn how to be Oba of Benin? No. Traditional institutions and the knowledge-based institutions. But Western governance or modern government by political elites is a script that we studied in university. And when we act it out, it's about vested interests. What is my interest in it? What do I take from it? So leadership must cut across all of this and must understand all of this. And leadership is about service. Leadership is not about accumulation of capital. Leadership is not about impoverishing others. But the selection process has to be more transparent and accountable. And the whole of Africa must learn that what you cannot give what you do not have. Nemo dat non quam habet. So leadership is key. We've seen what has happened in a few weeks, in a few months. Now, we saw what happened in India, first visit, where the number one diplomat correctly assumes his position and markets Nigeria. That's what leaders do. The work for the ambassador of High Commissioner in Delhi is substantially reduced because the president did what he was supposed to do. So what I'm saying, I hope I'm not reading my own. What I'm saying,
Ambassador, while you are still on this, I know Kieran wants to come in. We can't run away from our past, which is like a shadow. It is easy, for instance, on the face of it, to say, oh, there are coups in Francophone African countries. But there is also an emergent view that the independence that a number of these Francophone countries got in Africa wasn't real independence. With economic and financial stranglehold that they had, it just limited their space for independent action. So in that instance, how will Africans now begin to conceive of themselves and say, look, we have our destiny truly in our own hands?
We have countries in Africa that have had only two presidents since 1960. And who talks about them? Is it an issue for democratic discussion in the global forums? Do they talk about it? Because the interests are there to protect them. If it were Nigeria, Nigeria is this, Nigeria is this. We know the history. Some countries have had only two presidents in 60 years. And they are not an issue for discussion in Human Rights Council. They are not an issue for discussion in the United Nations. I don't want to go far more than this, but what I'm saying is that we need to be African. We need to do right things. Our destiny is in our own hands. We are not subject to anybody. Our true independence must be recovered. And we must dance to our own music. Thank you.
All right, sir. You know, we have really touched on very pertinent matters, especially with the concern of the kind of governance that we have on the African continent. You know, you mentioned that some countries have two presidents for 60 years and what have you. And we are out there, looking for collaboration and partnership, with some, countries that are well organized, in fact, as a matter of fact, not just well organized, but when it comes to the issue of implementation of policies, they are there. Well, let me take you, before we go on break, please, before this line of thought, goes away, let me engage Prof again on the issue of science, technology, and innovation. The new nomenclature for Nigeria is innovation, science, and technology. That's the ministry now. And I'm happy that the current minister traveled with the president to the UN. And what bothers me most when you talk about science and technology is the fact that every other thing that we do, locally, globally, and what have you, are driven by science and technology. Yet, we tend to pay less attention to the need for us to grow that technology from within, like you always talk about, because that's what China did. Historically, so you're a historian, to say, how did China break away? How did China break even? It's a master plan that was deliberately executed in the 70s, when we are at par with them in all ramifications. But today, they have one of the best warships globally. They have not even been launched in the first place, and so on. They have gone beyond that. They have over 150 satellites in the orbit today. The satellites that we had, the 2 communication satellites, were launched by China for us, with loans given to Nigeria. When we talk about collaboration and partnership, I witnessed some of them in that sector. Even the first satellite we launched in 2003 in Russia was also sponsored, by loan or through a loan and under Obasanjo administration. That was how we, brought in satellite technology in Nigeria. Today we have one of the biggest satellite enclave at Airport Road there. That's the NASDAQ. Right. So what am I trying to say is that the president perhaps mentioned science and tech, I believe, but what do you think Africa can achieve if we do not, or if we continue to rely on importation of goods and services from the persons we want to partner with? You rightly said earlier on that, look, there's no equality in partnership because you have a stronger power and smaller power. And in balancing or arriving at equilibrium in terms of partnership, what should we be asking for? I'm happy that Czech Republic, for the first time, a European country deliberately wanted to transfer technology to Nigeria. That is in the offing. It's being worked out. Right. But that's the first time. Well, the second time actually, because China was the first to open up to Nigeria to say, look, we're going to launch a satellite, we'll train your engineers and scientists. They did that, trained about 100 of them before the launch of the satellite to empower us, to give us capacity to even run the satellite as the case may be. Now, what is it for us we should be doing with those partners that we're looking for in terms of technology that will enable us to grow from, from ground, then up to the sky, wherever you want to take it to?
Something is key, really. You cannot trigger any development or any policy or any idea, without a framework, a policy framework, a formulation stage, implementation stage, and probably review. You've mentioned China, quite rightly. At the time, statistics show that nearly 150,000 Chinese students go to the US every year, to obtain degrees. And of course, about 100,000 of them are also found in different European countries to obtain foreign degrees, to obtain degree in different European countries. I was privileged to have done 1 or 2 courses, to have earned 1 or 2 certificates in England, and I know the population of Chinese students that I studied with. But the thing is that by the time they finish in those countries, they return home. They returned home to go and help the development of their country, deliberate policies. Some of them were sponsored by their government, which means that there must have been a contemplation around the obvious superiority of Western powers in terms of science and technology. So because of this, some level of superiority, go there, learn 1 or 2 things, and come back and replicate it there. And one way or the other, we can see it adding up to the way in which they've been able to propel themselves to a different level. But of course, when you're talking about science and technology, it also involves resources. How well resourced are we? Are we investing rightly in research? Are we investing rightly in innovation? What percentage of our budget is going to this? Yes, you rightly mentioned it as well. Are we not too reliant on foreign products? Are we not continuing with some levels of neo-colonial ideology, a kind of psychological dependence on things that are foreign, things that are Western, and we may not necessarily argue about it because the evidence is palpable. You know, there are allegations in circles, reports in circle of how we prefer foreign products, you know, even where we have variants of it in this country. You know, so when we have this kind of thing, then there's hardly any reason why you can think that we will develop our own, because we're either weakening our own when we pander more to the preferences of these stronger nations, you know. So overall, it comes back again to the question of being deliberate about our policy orientation, and that has to be driven by leadership. That thing, that element that keeps coming up again and again. But how does leadership evolve? You know, probably there are two broad ways. Maybe deliberate. A good leader, how does he evolve? Maybe deliberate again, or the other one through happenstance. But there's a unifying process. That process has to be characterized with integrity and credibility. But let's not forget, sometimes we also make the mistake of continuously isolating our politicians, blaming our politicians. Where do those politicians come from? Are they from the sky? Are they from the moon? They are amongst us. If one set of politicians is often replacing the other, and they're probably not changing in terms of character disposition. So it means that we as a people are actually the ones that need some level of reorientation, reconscientization about the entity called Nigeria. You know, what level of belief do we have in the Nigeria as a nation, as the case could be? Where do we always find reports of corruption? You know, why has it been reoccurring from the 60s? Why do we have this attitude towards Nigeria as a place that belongs to nobody? You know, as a place that should be pilfered, badgered and battered. Just get in there, get the one you can get, and take the money abroad, enjoy yourself, or build mansions and castles around. Why is it continuing? Fundamental questions that we have to ask, and that will probably resolve or stop or discontinue through a leader with the political courage, the political will, you know, to put a stop to all these things.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. You're watching Good Morning Nigeria on the network service of the Nigerian Television Authority. We'll take a short break now. When we return, we'll continue with the last lap of the conversation. You're welcome back, and it's still Good Morning Nigeria on NTA's network service. Our two guests are still here with us in the studios. Ambassador Umoibe, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and of course a seasoned diplomat. And here also Professor of Mass Communication, Abiodun Adeniyi. Abiodun, I want to come back to the point that the President also touched on in his address to the UN General Assembly, and namely the issue of economic sabotage. Look, it's an offense in law, it's municipal law, for you to receive stolen property. And yes, a few jurisdictions have made some laws, made it slightly more difficult for you to deposit unexplained wealth in their systems. But it turns out that for the most part, a number of these countries provide safe haven for the loot that is purloined from the African continent. And then the deliberate economic sabotage, the collaborators you were talking about, you see how the African economy is ruined from time to time. And then you were also talking about minerals and arms smuggling. So how can we, as Africans ourselves, continually place these items on the front burner as part of the ways of instigating change, and at every opportunity at other international fora, we continue to highlight these issues to say, look, there are elements outside of the continent who were profiteering from the misery of the African continent?
Yeah, very, very important question, sir. And of course, it's very sadly ironical that these things are happening. But at the start of his comment, I remember Ambassador went into history, talked about slave trade. And of course, there are substantial reports that we're all probably familiar with of how slave trade was permitted because our local chiefs were also collaborators. They sold slaves to they sold human beings, to willing buyers, So you can also transport that understanding, in my own opinion, to what we are probably presently witnessing. Of course, we know, in the pillaging of our resources, there are local collaborators. If there are no local collaborators, it probably will not be happening, And then secondly, how do those local collaborators evolve? They probably evolve because of the contradictions in the system, contradiction that is not too inclusive, that is not too integrative, inequality in economic, inequality in opportunities. And opportunities are variegated. They can be in education, in education, in housing, in health, and different regards, particularly a state of hopelessness. And when people become hopeless, they are vulnerable, to any kind of power, be it foreign or local. But something that is also very important in the international politics that we have to highlight is the question of vested interest, and I think it has resonated severally in this discussion. People consider their own primary interest first, no matter the preference, no matter the diplomacy, no matter the international public relations on display. Their interest is primary. So if you're not serious with your own resources and we need it, and we can cut corners to get it, why not? Because it's going to help our own people. So that's what we see playing out, even though it's not happening in the open. And of course, you referred rightly to the question of, resources that are being stolen and kept in these foreign banks. And these things are obviously continuing because every day we keep having sensational salacious results of money stolen and kept in some of these banks. Eventually, some of them are discovered, some of them are returned, but, it's just a tip of the iceberg. Yeah. And of course, it's much more like the angel's visit, few and far between, which is really very terrible. Of course, only God will help us.
All right, Prof. Thank you. Ambassador Ohomobi, the conference is still on, or the meeting is still on, the assembly. And again, we expect Nigerian officials, to meet with other counterparts. The other counterparts are on the sideline of the assembly. What are you expecting? Of course, we know we met about 7 ministers and other officials, from different sectors of our national life who may have gone there perhaps to do some negotiations, have conversations, establish contacts and all of that. So what are you expecting, from the sidelines, of this assembly?
Well, this is one of the opportunities that go with attendance at such a global forum, our assembly, every year, because it provides opportunities for you to conduct not just multilateral relations, but also bilateral relations for your own promotion, projection, and defense of your own national interest or continental interest. So I expect that there will be meetings that will be arranged on the side of this General Assembly with those whom Nigeria wants to partner with in the area of business. The economic aspect of our diplomacy will take over on those meetings. But there are also issues to deal with governance and other interests that will be part of the agenda for some of these sideline meetings. But they are a veritable aspect of attendance at the UN meeting because it's economically beneficial. Instead of going to Sri Lanka from here, you are there with the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka, you are there with the Prime Minister of India, and you can do the same conversations. Yes. And so it's cost effective to have such a forum. And countries like Nigeria, the number one African economy, will take full advantage, economic advantage of this to propagate its economic diplomacy. So I expect a lot will come out of there. And the other thing that we can also look at is even there's the one that you cannot quantify. The fact that you know that every year there's a forum such as this that you will have to tell the world, and the world can also speak to you, even on matters of your own, what's going on in your own country. Elevates your sense of your capacity for governance and your interests, because you don't want to, morally, you don't want to be confronted with challenges that you cannot defend. You make a statement in General Assembly, which everybody claps to, but you return home and you do the opposite, or you do nothing about it. How can you come the next year to face and people ask what happened to this? So there's this moral. Winston Churchill said in 1954 that the United Nations was not created to take us to heaven, but to stop us from going to hell. So it's a very good annual meeting, and it stops us from going to hell.
To hell. Very well, very well. Our president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, already has had some meetings, and they've been reported by a correspondent. He's met with South African counterpart, Cyril Ramaphosa. He's also met with the president of the Comoros, and I also saw a visual of the president meeting with the president of ExxonMobil, where, of course, he was an employee until, of course, he got into politics and then became a senator. Very useful point. But one other point that the president, again, restated, because this has been on for a while, it's climate action. And he says, look, one size cannot fit all. One size cannot fit all. But it appears that the global north is virtually insistent on getting everybody to wear a certain size of shoes that is inappropriate. And this is likely to create complications, because you create a new order and all of a sudden, and we're talking about climate action and what needs to be done and so on and so forth. Why is there some difficulty in achieving a breakthrough of the otherwise laudable acceptance of variegated approaches to achieving climate action for the benefit of all of humanity? Nigeria has already said, for instance, that, look, we're using gas as our energy transition, so don't block off financing for gas for that particular purpose. But is it a long talk that we're going to have, or is it part of the international politics with regard to the global economic order?
Yeah, I think it's also part of some level of ideological inequality, you know. Their understanding is different from our own, and of course they find it very difficult to see things from our own perspective. Sometimes you may not also blame them, because these things happen within context, and self-interest is paramount in a global relation, irrespective of how decentered, how integrated the world has increasingly become. And these are influential countries. They are concerned about sustainability, and if they see anything that will prevent this, becomes a problem for them. But again, back to the question of the need for us to be courageous, to take actions, looking inwards. The evidence is here with us every day, every year. We see flooding. There are cases of, yes, the president also mentioned it, the question of desertification, and so many things around us that are evidence of the problem around this, which is why we have to be original and creative in our own situation. But even much more important than that, as we probably begin to round up, is something that keeps coming up in my head. Every time I think about the president's traveling, I remember 14 billion coming into Nigeria, $14 billion US coming into Nigeria from India. That's what the spokesperson said is been estimated as the investment we're expecting from India. And I remember the stopover in Dubai as well. The hope that visa will be restored and that airlines in that area will start coming into Nigeria. Even though there are controversies around it, I'm hopeful that at some point these things will be resolved. So in the US too, I expect that we'll have some announcement in the next few days on the successes they have made. But beyond these optics, beyond this one-off pronouncement, is the need for us to ensure execution, to follow up these things so that we can see them coming into fruition for the benefit of the country. So it shouldn't just be about impression management or the creation of impression, for a momentary, epicentric kind of optics. It should be continuous and sustainable, as the case could be.
Well, thanks. Ambassador, I want to return to this again. It's where you can liken it to the debate at the Human Rights Council. Russia and Ukraine have been at war for over a year and a half now, and there's no end in sight. But you can hear the amount that well-endowed nations are pledging to Ukraine. And yet, on the African continent, not much. That's why I was asking, why is it difficult for Africa to have an equivalent of a Marshall Plan? How do we persuade them to say, get this thing done, it will be for the benefit of all of humanity? As your closing thoughts.
Well, as my closing thoughts, the destiny of Africa is in the hands of Africans. Africa has a history, and we know what Africa has gone through in history. The point that Professor made, I think is valid, that there were some people who were complicit in slave trade and all of that. But why I recognize that is not to talk about the consequences of that event, which has never attracted any global attention or interest. But the massacre of the Jews, people talk about it today. What I'm saying is, we must have genuine heart. We must be genuine in our partnership. Jaja Opobo was told to sign, African leaders signed treaties of friendship. That's what the treaty was called. But this became documents to show effective occupation at the Berlin West African Conference. How did my treaty that we are now friends become my surrender of my treaty, surrendering my sovereignty to you? That happened. Who talks about that?
Jaja did what? He refused to sign it?
Jaja was told to enter the ship, and he entered the ship, and that was how he was carried away to the Caribbean.
All right, sir. We're gonna end it here, because you see, there are many things, many items you have raised, many points you've raised. Open luxuriation, living in affluence and among very poor and wretched people, driving on untarred road, cars worth billions of naira. You see the ones I've seen in Abuja here. I saw one car, I can't even describe it, and it's been driven by someone in government. It's touchy. Philosophy of international relations you talked about, and this philosophy also how do I put it now, nationalized, to say, look, this is our own philosophy. If there's any international philosophy, fine, we'll have to get our own here down, then now join the international philosophy of international relations. So you can't expect partnership where you're asking for aids and grants and what have you, when even the grants given to you is not properly utilized. When the people giving you the grant also know they are not utilizing the money properly, when they also know that you are returning the money to them and putting in their banks,
but they are receiving your stolen patrimony.
Exactly. See, so that is the point. You are dealing with some private sectors conniving with you to send this money away, not the government of those countries. So the whole thing, the whole mix, you have to rethink, like you said, a Marshall Plan, something else, to get out of the woods. And on that note, we conclude this conversation. I'd like to first of all appreciate you, Ambassador, for being here this morning. Ambassador Dr. Martin Ohomobi, former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, former Under Secretary General of the United Nations, and former President of the United Nations Human Rights Council. Thank you for being here.
Thank you again for having me.
Professor Abiodun Adeni, Professor of Communication and Deputy Dean, School of Postgraduate Studies, Bayes University. Thank you for being professorial in your analysis this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right.
So that's it for us on Good Morning Nigeria. Thank you for being with us. Tomorrow is another day, same time. We're here at 7 o'clock in the morning. Look after yourselves. I'm Kingsley Osadolo.
And I'm Kirian Umayo. I'll see you again. Have a great day.